Behind the golden gates of Ravencrest Palace, where every smile is practiced and every gesture calculated, a single moment captured on security cameras threatens to shatter the carefully constructed image of the most powerful royal family in Europe. When Duchess Elena witnesses something that should never have happened to her young daughter, the delicate balance of power, loyalty, and family bonds begins to crumble. What starts as a moment of royal discipline spirals into a crisis that will test every relationship within the palace walls, forcing each member of the House of Ashford to choose between duty and truth, tradition and justice. The autumn rain pelted against the towering windows of Ravencrest Palace as Duchess Elena Ashford hurried through the marble corridors, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. She had just returned from a charity gala in the capital, her emerald gown still shimmering under the crystal chandeliers that lined the grand hallway. The palace felt unusually quiet for an evening, with most of the staff having retired to their quarters. Elena paused outside the security office, noticing the door slightly ajar and warm light spilling into the corridor. Head of Security Marcus Reed sat hunched over multiple monitors, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of surveillance screens. He knocked gently on the doorframe. "Working late again, Marcus?" Eileen asked, stepping into the room. Marcus looked up, his expression immediately shifting to one of concern. "Your Grace, I was just reviewing today's footage from the West Wing. There's something you need to see." Elena's stomach tightened. The West Wing housed the children's quarters, including the rooms of her 7-year-old daughter, Princess Sophie. What kind of something? Marcus hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. It involves Princess Sophie and Queen Mother Victoria. The incident occurred around 3 this afternoon in the blue drawing room. Queen Mother Victoria was Duke William's stepmother, a woman who had married into the family when William was already an adult. She had always maintained a complex relationship with the younger royals, particularly the children. Elena had noticed tension between Victoria and Sophie recently, but she had attributed it to the normal adjustment period that often occurred in blended royal families. "Show me," Elena said, moving closer to the monitor. Marcus clicked on a file, and the screen filled with a view of the elegant blue drawing room. The timestamp showed 3:17 p.m. Elena watched as her daughter Sophie entered the room, her school uniform slightly rumpled from the day's activities. The little girl was carrying a small bouquet of flowers she had picked from the palace gardens, something she often did for family members. Queen Mother Victoria entered the frame moments later, her posture rigid and commanding. Even through the silent security footage, Elena could see the disapproval on Victoria's face as she approached Sophie. The conversation appeared heated, with Victoria gesturing sharply toward the flowers. "Can you enhance the audio?" Elena asked, though she suspected the answer. "The blue drawing room doesn't have audio recording for privacy reasons," Marcus replied grimly. "But watch what happens next." Elena's heart began to race as she watched Victoria's body language become increasingly aggressive. Sophie, meanwhile, seemed to shrink back, clutching her flowers protectively. The little girl appeared to be trying to explain something, her young face earnest and confused. Then it happened. In one swift motion, Victoria raised her hand and struck Sophie across the face. The impact was clear and unmistakable, sending the small girl stumbling backward. The flowers scattered across the ornate carpet as Sophie raised her hand to her cheek, her mouth open, in what Elena could only imagine was a cry of shock and pain. Elena's own hand flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips. "Dear God," she whispered. The footage continued, showing Victoria leaning down to say something directly to Sophie, before storming out of the room. Sophie remained alone, gathering up her scattered flowers with trembling hands, tears clearly streaming down her face. "How long has this been going on?" Elena demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and maternal instinct. "This is the first incident I've captured on camera," Marcus replied carefully. "But I've noticed some concerning patterns in the past few weeks. Princess Sophie has been avoiding certain areas of the palace when Queen Mother Victoria is present, and there have been reports from staff about raised voices in the children's wing." Elena's mind raced through recent interactions. Sophie had been unusually quiet during family dinners, and there had been nights when she'd asked to sleep in her parents' room, claiming nightmares. Elena had dismissed these as normal childhood phases, but now they took on a sinister new meaning. "Where is Sophie now?" Elena asked. "In her room, Your Grace." "She's been there since dinner." Elena turned to leave, then stopped. "Marcus, I need you to compile all surveillance footage from the past month, involving Queen Mother Victoria and any of the children. Every interaction, every moment they were in the same vicinity. And I need it done discreetly. Of course, Your Grace. What about informing Duke William?
Elena paused at the doorway.
William was currently in his study preparing for tomorrow's state meetings. He had always maintained a complicated relationship with his stepmother, respecting her position while keeping an emotional distance. This revelation would shatter the careful balance they had all maintained. Not yet, Elena said finally. I need to speak with Sophie first, confirm what we're seeing. But, Marcus, this footage is to remain strictly between us until I decide how to proceed. Eleanor made her way to the children's wing, her mind churning with implications. How had this happened under their noses? How had Victoria felt comfortable enough to strike a child in the palace, even without audio surveillance? The arrogance of the act suggested this wasn't an isolated incident. She knocked softly on Sophie's door before entering. Her daughter was curled up on her bed, still in her school uniform, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had been a gift from her grandfather. Sophie's cheek showed a faint red mark that Elena had somehow missed during their brief interaction at dinner. "Sweetheart," Elena said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" Sophie looked up with eyes that seemed older than her 7 years. "I'm fine, Mama. Sophie, I need you to tell me about this afternoon. About what happened with Queen Mother Victoria." The little girl's face immediately changed, fear flickering in her eyes. "Nothing happened, Mama. We just talked." Elena felt her heart breaking. "Darling, it's okay to tell me the truth. You won't get in trouble, I promise." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "She said I was being disrespectful by picking flowers without permission. She said royal children must learn proper behavior. And then what happened? She got very angry when I tried to explain that I picked them for her, to make her happy. She said I was lying and being manipulative like." Sophie trailed off. "Like who, sweetheart?" "Like my mama," Sophie whispered, tears beginning to fall. "She said I was going to grow up to be just like you, and that someone needed to teach me proper respect." Elena felt a cold fury building in her chest. This wasn't just about discipline or royal protocol. Victoria had targeted Sophie as a way to strike at Elena herself, using a 7-year-old child as a weapon in whatever personal vendetta she harbored. "Did she hurt you, Sophie?" Sophie touched her cheek unconsciously. "She said if I told anyone, there would be consequences for the whole family. She said sometimes children need to learn hard lessons to become proper royals." Elena pulled her daughter into her arms, feeling the small body tremble against her. "Listen to me very carefully, Sophie. What Queen Mother Victoria did was wrong. Adults should never hurt children, no matter what the reason. And you did nothing wrong by picking flowers or by being yourself." "But she's the Queen Mother," Sophie said, confused. "Doesn't that mean she's in charge?" Elena realized that this moment would define not just their family's future, but Sophie's understanding of justice, power, and her own worth. Being royal doesn't give anyone the right to hurt others, especially children. There are rules that even queens must follow. As Elena held her daughter, she knew that the conversation with William could no longer be delayed. The footage would devastate him, but more importantly, it would force him to confront the reality of who his stepmother truly was, when she believed no one was watching. The palace suddenly felt less like a home and more like a battleground, where the most innocent members of the family had become unwitting casualties in a war they didn't understand. Eleanor realized that protecting her children would require her to challenge not just Victoria, but potentially the entire structure of royal hierarchy that had allowed this abuse to occur unchecked. Outside, the autumn storm intensified, rain lashing against the ancient windows as if the very foundations of Ravencrest Palace were under assault. Elena spent the night pacing the corridors of the private royal quarters, her mind racing with strategies and potential consequences. By dawn, she had made her decision. She found William in his private study, already dressed in his formal attire for the day's diplomatic meetings, reviewing briefing documents with his usual methodical precision. "William, we need to talk," Elena said, closing the door behind her and engaging the privacy lock. Something in her tone made him look up immediately. In their 15 years of marriage, Elena had rarely used that particular combination of urgency and gravity.
"What's happened? It's about Victoria and Sophie."
Elena moved to his desk, placing her hands on the polished mahogany surface. "There's something you need to see, but before I show you, I need you to promise me that you'll let me finish explaining everything before you react."
William's expression shifted to one of alert concern. "Eleanor, you're frightening me. What exactly are we talking about?" "Yesterday afternoon, Victoria struck Sophie. Hard enough to leave a mark. It was captured on security footage." The color drained from William's face. "That's impossible. Victoria would never..." He stopped, seeing Elena's expression. You're absolutely certain? I watched it happen, William. Multiple times. Sophie confirmed it when I spoke with her last night. And based on what our daughter told me, this isn't the first time. William stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Show me, now. They made their way to the security office where Marcus Reed was already waiting. Elena had contacted him early that morning to prepare the footage. Marcus nodded grimly as they entered, indicating that the video was ready for viewing. Your Majesty? Marcus said formally. I've prepared the footage from yesterday afternoon as well as several other incidents from the past 3 weeks that may be relevant. William watched in absolute silence as the scene unfolded on the monitor. Elena observed her husband's face carefully, noting how his jaw tightened and his hands slowly clenched into fists. When Victoria's hand made contact with Sophie's face, William made a sound that Elena had never heard before, a low, dangerous growl that seemed to come from somewhere primal. Again, William said quietly. Marcus replayed the footage. This time, William's focus was intense, analytical. He was studying every detail, every gesture, every moment of the interaction. The other incidents, William said, his voice carefully controlled. Marcus switched to different footage from the previous weeks. They watched as Victoria cornered Sophie in a corridor, pointing an accusatory finger at the child's face, while she cowered against the wall. Another clip showed Victoria roughly grabbing Sophie's arm and dragging her away from a group of palace staff members, apparently angry about something the child had said or done. How many staff members witnessed these incidents? William asked. At least a dozen, Your Majesty, but none reported them through official channels. And why not? Marcus hesitated. Your Majesty, Queen Mother Victoria has made it clear that she considers the children's discipline to be a family matter, not subject to staff interference. Several servants have expressed to me privately that they felt conflicted about intervening with the senior royal. Elena watched her husband process this information. She could see the exact moment when the full implications hit him. Not just that his stepmother had abused his daughter, but that the palace culture and hierarchy had enabled it to continue unchecked. Leave us, William said to Marcus, who immediately exited the room. For a long moment, William and Elena stood in silence, the frozen image of Victoria's hand striking Sophie still displayed on the monitor. How long have you suspected? William asked finally. I didn't suspect anything, Elena admitted. I should have. Sophie's been having nightmares avoiding certain parts of the palace, acting differently during family meals. But I attributed it to normal childhood phases. William moved to the window, staring out at the palace grounds where maintenance staff were already beginning their daily routines. Victoria came to live with us when I was 22, he said quietly. My father had been alone for 3 years after Mother died, and Victoria seemed to bring him happiness. She was always intense about protocol and proper behavior, but I thought that was just her way of finding her place in the family. This isn't about protocol, William. This is about power and control. Sophie told me that Victoria specifically mentioned me during the incident, said that Sophie was going to grow up to be like her mother, and that someone needed to teach her proper respect. William turned back to Elena, his expression darker than she had ever seen it. She's using our daughter to get to you, to get to us. It seems that way. What did Sophie say when you talked to her? Elena related the entire conversation, watching as William's face grew increasingly tense. When she mentioned Victoria's threat about consequences for the whole family if Sophie spoke up, William's composure finally cracked. She terrorized a 7-year-old into silence, he said, his voice rising. She made our daughter afraid to come to us for protection. William, we need to think carefully about how we handle this. Victoria is still Queen Mother. She has her own supporters in court, her own political connections. If we mishandle this situation, it could create a crisis that extends far beyond our family. I don't give a damn about politics right now, Elena. She hurt our child. Elena moved closer to her husband, I know, and she needs to be held accountable. But we have to be strategic. Sophie's welfare comes first, which means we need to ensure that whatever we do actually protects her and doesn't just satisfy our need for immediate justice. William was quiet for several minutes, and Elena could see him shifting from emotional father to strategic royal leader. It was a transformation she had witnessed many times over the years, but never under circumstances this personal. We need to document everything, William said finally. Every incident, every witness, every piece of evidence. Marcus was right to preserve the footage, but we need more. We need to interview the staff members who witnessed incidents but didn't report them. We need to have Sophie examined by the palace physician to document any injuries or signs of trauma. And Victoria? Victoria cannot know that we're aware of what's been happening. Not yet. If she realizes we're investigating, she might escalate her behavior or try to leave the palace before we can take action.
Elena felt a chill.
You think she might try to hurt Sophie again? I think Victoria is someone who has been operating without consequences for too long, and people like that become increasingly bold. The fact that she felt comfortable striking Sophie in a room where she knew security cameras were present suggests either incredible arrogance or a belief that her position makes her untouchable. They spent the next hour developing a plan. Marcus would discreetly interview staff members who might have witnessed incidents. Elena would arrange for Dr. Sarah Chen, the palace physician, to examine Sophie under the pretext of a routine health check. William would begin reviewing Victoria's activities, finances, and correspondence to determine if there were other issues they needed to be aware of. There's one more thing, Elena said as they prepared to leave the security office. We need to consider the possibility that Sophie isn't Victoria's only victim. We have visiting children regularly for state functions and family gatherings. Other staff members' children who live on the palace grounds. William's expression grew grim. You think this could be a pattern? I think we need to find out. And William, we need to consider what this means for Victoria's position in the family and in the royal household. Even if we handle this discreetly, she can't continue to live here if she's dangerous to children. As they made their way back to the main palace, Elena caught sight of Victoria, in the distance, walking through the formal gardens with her usual regal bearing. The sight of the woman who had terrorized her daughter, now strolling casually through the palace grounds as if nothing had happened, filled Elena with a cold determination. The game of palace politics had suddenly become very personal, and Elena realized that protecting her family might require her to become someone she had never been before. Someone willing to use every tool of royal power to destroy an enemy who threatened her children. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace corridors, but Elena felt as though they were entering a much darker period in their family's history. 3 days had passed since Elena and William discovered the footage of Victoria striking Sophie. They had moved carefully, methodically, building their case while maintaining the appearance of normal family life. Sarah Chen's examination of Sophie had revealed not only the facial bruising from the recent incident, but also older marks on the child's arms that were consistent with grip bruises from being grabbed forcefully. Elena was in the palace library, reviewing historical precedents for removing senior royal family members from official positions, when Sophie burst through the heavy oak doors, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, I need to tell you something important," Sophie said, running to Elena's chair. Elena immediately closed the leather-bound volume she had been reading and pulled her daughter onto her lap. "What happened, sweetheart?" "It's about Tommy," Sophie said, referring to 8-year-old Thomas Morrison, the son of the palace's head gardener who lived in the staff quarters with his family. "Yesterday, after my writing lesson, I saw Queen Mother Victoria talking to Tommy in the rose garden. She was very angry, and when I got closer, I saw her push him really hard. He fell down and hurt his knee." Elena's blood ran cold. Their worst fears were being confirmed. Victoria's behavior wasn't limited to Sophie. "Did you see what happened after that? She told Tommy that if he told his parents about falling, she would make sure his father lost his job, and they would have to leave the palace. Tommy was crying, but he promised not to tell. Then she saw me watching and got really angry." "What did she say to you?" Sophie's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said that if I told anyone what I saw, something terrible would happen to Tommy's family. She said it would be my fault if they became homeless." Elena felt a surge of protective fury unlike anything she had ever experienced. Victoria wasn't just abusing children. She was using their love and concern for others to ensure their silence. It was a level of manipulation that spoke to a deeply disturbed mind. "Sophie, listen to me very carefully," Elena said. "You did the right thing by telling me. Tommy's family is not going to lose their home, and nothing terrible is going to happen to them. Queen Mother Victoria lied to you to try to keep you quiet, but she's so powerful, Mama. Can she really make Tommy's family leave?" Elena realized this was a teachable moment about power, justice, and moral courage. Victoria has some power because of her position, but there are limits to what she can do. And more importantly, your father and I have power too, and we will always use it to protect children and innocent people. Elena immediately contacted William through the palace's secure communication system, using the code phrase they had established to indicate urgent news about their investigation. Within minutes, William appeared in the library, having excused himself from a meeting with foreign diplomats. After Sophie repeated her account to William, they decided it was time to accelerate their timeline. William arranged for Thomas Morrison and his family to be discreetly moved to temporary quarters in the main palace, ostensibly for a special gardening project that required closer collaboration with the royal household. "We can't wait any longer," William said once they had ensured the Morrison family was safely relocated. "Victoria is escalating, and she's now threatening staff families to maintain her silence. This has moved beyond family discipline into criminal territory." That evening, William requested a private meeting with Victoria in the formal blue drawing room, the same room where she had struck Sophie. Elena insisted on being present, despite William's initial objections. "This is a family matter," Elena said firmly, "and I am part of this family. More importantly, I'm Sophie's mother, and I need to look Victoria in the eye when we confront her." They arranged for Marcus to position himself discreetly nearby and to ensure that both audio and video recording were active, despite the room's usual privacy protections. Whatever was about to happen, they needed documentation. Victoria arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, dressed in an elegant navy dress with the family's sapphire brooch, a symbol of her position as Queen Mother. Her bearing was confident, almost defiant, as if she sensed that something significant was about to occur. "You requested to see me," Victoria said, settling into one of the antique chairs with practiced grace. William remained standing, a position that immediately signaled the formal nature of the meeting. "Victoria, we need to discuss your interactions with the children in this household." "I'm not sure what you mean," Victoria replied smoothly. "I've always maintained appropriate relationships with all family members." Elena stepped forward, placing a tablet on the coffee table between them. "We have security footage of you striking Sophie in this room 3 days ago." For just a moment, Victoria's composure slipped. Elena caught a flash of something dangerous in her eyes before the mask of royal dignity reasserted itself. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Victoria said. "Sophie was behaving inappropriately, and I provided necessary correction. Surely you don't expect me to allow children to run wild through the palace without proper guidance." "Proper guidance doesn't involve hitting a 7-year-old child," William said, his voice deadly quiet. "William, you were raised with discipline and structure, and look how well you turned out. Perhaps if Elena had provided Sophie with more consistent boundaries, I wouldn't need to intervene." Elena felt her own temper rising, but she kept her voice level. "Victoria, we also know about your interactions with Thomas Morrison, the gardener's son. We know about the threats you made to both children about keeping silent." This time, Victoria's mask dropped completely. "Those children need to learn respect for authority. They need to understand that actions have consequences. The problem with modern parenting is that children are coddled and praised for everything instead of being taught proper behavior." "So you admit to striking Sophie and physically assaulting Thomas Morrison?" William asked. "I admit to providing necessary discipline to children who were behaving inappropriately," Victoria replied, her chin raised defiantly. "As the senior woman in this household, it is both my right and my responsibility to ensure proper conduct." Elena realized that Victoria genuinely believed she was justified in her actions. This wasn't someone who had lost control in a moment of anger. This was someone who had a fundamentally warped understanding of power and children's rights. "Victoria," William said formally, "effective immediately, you are forbidden from being alone with any children on palace grounds. You will not approach, speak to, or interact with Sophie, Thomas Morrison, or any other minors without direct supervision from myself or Elena." Victoria stood abruptly, her face flushing with anger. "You cannot restrict my movements in my own home. I am Queen Mother of this realm." "You are Queen Mother by courtesy title only," William replied. "You have no legal authority over anyone in this household, and you certainly have no right to physically discipline children who are not your own." "Sophie is family," Victoria said coldly, "and that boy's parents work for us. Their children are part of this household, which means they fall under my jurisdiction." Elena realized they were looking at someone who had created an entire justification system for her behavior. "Victoria, children are not property. Staff families are not servants to be controlled. What you've been doing is abuse, and it stops now." "You've turned my stepson against me," Victoria said, her voice rising. "You've filled his head with modern nonsense about children's rights and permissive parenting. You've weakened this family's authority and discipline." William stepped closer to Victoria, his presence suddenly intimidating. "You threatened my daughter. You terrorized children and used their fear to keep them quiet. You made threats against innocent families. These are not the actions of someone concerned about discipline or family authority. These are the actions of someone who enjoys having power over people who can't fight back." I was protecting this family's reputation and ensuring proper behavior, Victoria insisted. Someone has to maintain standards. Elena saw the futility in continuing the conversation. Victoria was not going to acknowledge wrongdoing or show remorse. She was going to continue justifying her behavior and blaming others for her actions. Victoria, Elena said quietly, pack your belongings. You have until tomorrow evening to make arrangements for alternative housing. You are no longer welcome to live in this palace. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at Elena as if she had been physically slapped, then turned to William with an expression of shocked betrayal.
William, surely you're not going to allow this? Victoria said.
I am your father's widow. I am Queen Mother. You cannot simply banish me because of a misunderstanding about child discipline. William's voice was steel. Victoria, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of abuse that endangered children under my protection. You will leave, or I will have palace security escort you out. The choice is yours. Victoria drew herself up to her full height, and for a moment, Elena saw the full force of the entitled rage that had been lurking beneath the surface. This family will regret this decision, Victoria said coldly. I know things about this household, about this family's finances and private matters that would be very interesting to certain members of the press. Elena felt a chill of recognition. This was the real Victoria, not just an abuser, but someone willing to destroy the entire family if she didn't get her way. The battle for their family's safety had just become a war. The threat Victoria had made before leaving the blue drawing room hung over the palace like a storm cloud. Elena and William spent the night in emergency planning sessions with their closest advisors, including Marcus Reed, Palace Communications Director Diana Walsh, and their personal attorney Richard Blackwood. We need to assume Victoria will follow through on her threat, Diana said, spreading newspapers and tablets across the conference table in William's private study. The question is how much damage she can actually do and how we can get ahead of it. Richard Blackwood, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, looked grim. Victoria has had access to family financial records, private correspondence, and sensitive information about state matters for nearly 15 years. If she's been collecting material with blackmail in mind, she could have quite an arsenal. The priority has to be protecting the children and the staff families, Elena said firmly. Whatever political damage Victoria can cause, we'll deal with it, but we cannot allow her to hurt innocent people. Marcus Reed entered the room carrying a laptop and several files. Your Majesties, I've completed a preliminary investigation into Queen Mother Victoria's recent activities. What I've found is concerning. He placed the laptop on the table and turned the screen toward them. Over the past 6 months, Victoria has been copying files from the palace computer network. Financial records, private emails, guest lists, security protocols. She's been systematically gathering information. William leaned forward, studying the screen. She's been planning this. It appears so, Your Majesty. I also found evidence that she's been in communication with Geoffrey Hartwell at the Royal Tribune. Elena's blood ran cold. Geoffrey Hartwell was known for his aggressive investigative pieces about royal family scandals. He had a reputation for paying well for insider information and caring little about the consequences his stories might have on innocent people. How long have they been in contact? William asked. At least 3 months, Marcus replied. I can't access the content of their communications. Victoria was using encrypted messaging services, but the frequency increased significantly after the first incident with Princess Sophie that we have on record. Diana Walsh looked up from her notes. This suggests Victoria has been building a contingency plan in case her behavior was discovered. She's been preparing to go nuclear if she faced consequences. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Elena asked. Based on Hartwell's usual pattern, if Victoria provides him with substantial material today, he could have a story ready for publication within 48 hours, Diana replied. His pieces typically run on Sunday mornings for maximum impact. Richard Blackwood cleared his throat. There may be legal options. If Victoria attempts to publish private family correspondence or confidential palace information, we could seek an injunction. However, if she frames it as exposing wrongdoing or matters of public interest, the courts might be reluctant to intervene. Elena felt the walls closing in around her family. Victoria had turned their decision to protect their children into a weapon that could destroy their reputation and potentially their position. There's another issue, Marcus said quietly. I've discovered that Victoria has been in contact with Child Protective Services in the capital. The room fell silent. William slowly turned to face Marcus. What kind of contact? She filed a formal complaint yesterday morning, before our confrontation with her. She's alleging that Princess Sophie is being emotionally abused and neglected by her parents, specifically citing Elena's unstable behavior and William's absence from parenting duties. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She's accusing us of abusing Sophie? It gets worse, Marcus continued. Victoria provided child services with photographs of Sophie that she claims show signs of distress and trauma, along with testimony from unnamed palace staff members who allegedly witnessed concerning behavior. William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. She's manipulated evidence to make it look like we're the ones hurting Sophie. The child services investigation could begin as early as tomorrow, Richard said gravely. Once that process starts, it becomes a matter of public record. Even if the allegations are ultimately dismissed, the damage to your reputations could be severe. Elena's mind raced through the implications. Sophie would have to be interviewed by strangers, possibly removed from our care while the investigation proceeds. She'd be traumatized all over again. Not necessarily, Diana said. If we can get ahead of this story, control the narrative, we might be able to minimize the impact. How? William asked. Diana turned to Elena. You go public first. Hold a press conference, tell the truth about what Victoria did to Sophie and Thomas Morrison. Present the evidence, including the security footage. Frame it as protecting children from an abuser rather than a family power struggle. Absolutely not, William said immediately. I will not put my 7-year-old daughter in the media spotlight. She's been through enough. Then what do you suggest? Diana asked. Because Victoria's story is going to come out either way, at least if we tell it first. We can control how it's presented. Elena looked around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated their lives to protecting and serving her family. She realized that this moment would define not just their immediate future, but the kind of leaders they would be remembered as. There's a third option, Elena said slowly. We cooperate fully with the child services investigation. We invite them to interview Sophie, examine the evidence, speak with witnesses. We demonstrate complete transparency. That's incredibly risky, Richard warned. Government investigations can take months. The media speculation alone could be devastating. But it's the right thing to do, Elena continued. If we're going to ask people to believe us over Victoria, we need to be willing to subject ourselves to the same scrutiny we're asking them to apply to her. William was quiet for a long moment. Elena, you realize what you're suggesting? Government investigators in our home, examining our parenting, questioning our daughter about family matters. I realize that Sophie has already been questioned about family matters by Victoria, under threat and intimidation, Elena replied.
At least with official investigators, she'll have advocates and protections. Marcus Reed looked up from his laptop.
Your Majesty, there's one more thing. I've been monitoring Victoria's movements since she left the palace. She checked into the Grandview Hotel in the capital an hour ago, and Geoffrey Hartwell was seen entering the building shortly after. They're meeting tonight, Diana concluded, which means whatever story they're planning will be ready for tomorrow's news cycle. Elena felt a strange calm settle over her. The waiting and planning phase was over. Victoria had forced their hand, and now they would have to trust that the truth would be stronger than manipulation and lies. Marcus, I need you to prepare a complete evidence package, Elena said. Everything we have on Victoria's abuse of the children, all the security footage, witness statements, medical documentation. If we're going to fight this battle, we're going to fight it with facts. Diana, draft a statement for release tomorrow morning. Simple, direct, focused on protecting children. No personal attacks on Victoria, just the facts of what happened. Richard, contact Child Services directly. Let them know we're aware of Victoria's complaint and that we welcome their investigation. Arrange for them to interview Sophie here at the palace, with her pediatrician and a child advocate present. William looked at his wife with something approaching awe. You're going to turn Victoria's attack into an opportunity to demonstrate our integrity. I'm going to protect our daughter by making sure everyone understands who the real victim is in this situation, Elena corrected. Victoria wants to use the media and government agencies as weapons. We're going to use them as tools for justice. As the meeting broke up and advisors hurried away to implement their assignments, Elena and William were left alone in the study. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over the palace grounds. Are you sure about this approach? William asked. Once we release that statement, once the investigation begins, there's no going back. Our private life becomes public property. Elena moved to the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. William, for the past week, I've been so focused on protecting our family's privacy and reputation that I almost forgot what this is really about. A woman hurt our child and threatened other children. If we try to handle this quietly to protect ourselves, we're sending the message that some people are above accountability because of their status or position. And if our reputation is destroyed, if the investigation finds problems with our parenting, if Sophie is traumatized by the media attention, Alina turned back to her husband. Then we'll deal with those consequences. But we'll deal with them knowing we did the right thing. Sophie needs to see that when someone hurts you, you don't hide or seek revenge, you seek justice. William nodded slowly, and Elena could see him reaching the same conclusion she had arrived at during the long night of planning. They were about to gamble everything on the principle that truth would ultimately triumph over manipulation. It was either the most courageous decision of their lives, or the one that would destroy everything they had built. The Royal Tribune's Sunday morning edition hit newsstands at 6 a.m. with a headline that sent shockwaves through the capital. Police cover-up. Queen Mother exposes royal child abuse scandal. Geoffrey Hartwell's story painted a devastating picture of Elena and William as negligent, emotionally unstable parents who had physically and psychologically abused Princess Sophie before scapegoating Victoria to cover their crimes. But by 7 a.m., the palace had released its own statement, accompanied by carefully edited security footage that clearly showed Victoria striking Sophie and intimidating Thomas Morrison.
Doctor?
Sarah Chen, speaking as the children's physician, confirmed the pattern of injuries consistent with adult-inflicted abuse. The Morrison family, supported by Palace Legal Counsel, publicly described Victoria's threats against their livelihood. Elena watched the early morning news coverage from the family's private sitting room, Sophie curled up beside her eating breakfast and blissfully unaware of the media storm surrounding her young life. William was fielding calls from government officials, foreign diplomats, and family members trying to understand the rapidly unfolding situation. At 9 a.m., Diana Walsh entered with updates from the Palace Communications Centre. "The public response is stronger than we anticipated," she said. "The security footage is being shared widely on social media, and there's growing outrage about Victoria's behaviour. Several child advocacy organisations have released statements supporting your decision to go public." "What about the Child Services investigation?" Elena asked. "They've moved it to priority status. A team will arrive at 2 p.m. today to interview Sophie and examine the evidence. They've also opened a separate investigation into Victoria's complaint against you. But the lead investigator indicated privately that the security footage substantially undermines her credibility." Elena felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The public seemed to be believing their version of events, but the real test would come when government investigators examined their family under a microscope. At noon, unexpected news arrived that changed everything. Marcus Reed burst into the sitting room with information that would shift the entire narrative.
"Your Majesties, Victoria has been arrested."
Elena looked up sharply. Arrested for what? The Capitol Police received multiple reports this morning from former staff members of Victoria's previous residence, before she married into the royal family.
Apparently, seeing the news coverage encouraged them to come forward with their own accounts of Victoria abusing children during social events at her estate. William entered the room just in time to hear Marcus's report. "How many reports?" "7 so far, Your Majesty. Children of guests, staff members' children, even some of Victoria's own relatives. The pattern goes back almost 20 years. Some of the victims are now adults and are providing detailed statements." Elena felt a complex mix of vindication and sadness. They had been right about Victoria's dangerous behavior, but discovering the extent of her history made Elena realize how many children had suffered in silence over the years. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Geoffrey Hartwell is facing his own legal issues. Publishing material he knew was obtained through illegal computer access has exposed him to criminal charges. The Royal Tribune is distancing themselves from the story and may fire him." When the Child Services team arrived that afternoon, they found a palace fully prepared for transparent cooperation. Sophie, supported by Dr. Chen and a child advocate, spoke candidly about her experiences with Victoria. The investigators also interviewed palace staff, reviewed medical records, and examined the security footage. Elena and William answered every question honestly, acknowledging mistakes they had made in not recognizing the signs of abuse sooner, but demonstrating their commitment to protecting all children in their household. 3 days later, the official Child Services report was released. It completely exonerated Elena and William, while recommending that Victoria be prohibited from unsupervised contact with minors. The report praised the royal couple's handling of the situation once they became aware of the abuse, noting their immediate protective actions and full cooperation with authorities. More importantly for Elena, Sophie seemed to be healing. With Victoria gone and the truth finally exposed, the 7-year-old was returning to her normal, cheerful self. She had resumed picking flowers from the palace garden, this time with encouragement from her parents and staff. 2 weeks after Victoria's arrest, Elena found herself in the blue drawing room, the scene of the original assault. Having tea with Sarah Morrison, Thomas's mother, the family had decided to remain at the palace, with Thomas's father taking on expanded responsibilities for the royal gardens. "I can't thank you enough," Sarah said. "When Thomas finally told us what had been happening, we felt so guilty that we hadn't protected him. But the way you and His Majesty handled everything, making sure our family was safe before dealing with the bigger picture, that meant everything to us." Elena set down her teacup, looking around the elegant room that had witnessed such ugliness but was now restored to its intended purpose as a place for family gathering. "Sarah, we should have been paying closer attention. Victoria was able to hurt children because the adults in their lives, including William and me, weren't vigilant enough. But you acted when you found out. You put the children's welfare above everything else, even your own reputation and privacy." Elena realized that this was perhaps the most important outcome of the entire crisis, not the media vindication or the legal consequences for Victoria, but the knowledge that they had faced a fundamental test of their values and made the right choice. 6 months later, Victoria was convicted on multiple charges of child abuse and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The trial revealed the full extent of her pattern of targeting vulnerable children and using her social position to escape consequences. Several families came forward to testify, and child protection laws were strengthened as a result of the case. Jeffrey Hartwell lost his job and faced professional disgrace for his role in attempting to suppress evidence of child abuse in favor of a salacious scandal story. The incident sparked broader discussions about media responsibility and the exploitation of children in news coverage. For the royal family, the crisis had strengthened rather than weakened their public standing. Elena's decision to prioritize truth over reputation had resonated with citizens who had grown tired of institutional cover-ups and privilege-based immunity from consequences. On a quiet Sunday morning exactly 1 year after the crisis began, Elena was walking through the palace gardens with Sophie and Thomas, watching them collect flowers for the staff dining room table. Sophie had specifically requested that they pick extra flowers for Marcus Reed, who had become something of a hero figure in her young mind. "Mama," Sophie said, carefully selecting a particularly beautiful rose, "I'm glad that Queen Mother Victoria isn't here anymore." "Why is that, sweetheart?" Elena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because now when children need help, the grown-ups listen to them instead of being scared." Elena smiled, realizing that Sophie had articulated the most important lesson of their ordeal. The crisis had been about much more than one woman's abusive behavior. It had been about creating an environment where children's voices were heard and their safety was prioritized above all other considerations. As they made their way back toward the palace, Elena caught sight of William standing at the window of his study, watching their small procession with an expression of profound contentment. They had gambled everything on doing the right thing, and in the end they had not just survived but had emerged as stronger individuals and as a family. The afternoon sun cast long, peaceful shadows across the palace grounds, and for the first time in over a year, Elena felt that their home was truly safe for everyone who lived within its walls. They had learned that protection of the innocent required constant vigilance, moral courage, and a willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for principle. It was, Elena reflected, perhaps the most valuable lesson anyone in their position could learn, and it was a lesson they would carry forward in every decision they made for the rest of their reign. The flowers Sophie and Thomas carried would grace the staff dining room that evening, a small symbol of beauty emerging from a period of darkness, and a reminder that truth, however painful its emergence, ultimately creates the foundation for genuine healing and positive change.